The Russian invasion of Poland was historically the beginning of a cascade of events that would eventually result in the outbreak of the Second World War. The Russians invaded, cut off the south. The soldiers fled to Romania and were sent to the old empire, and the Greeks hijacked the prisoners and took them. Yet today, we will be exploring two timelines where odds are better for Poland. In one, we will explore a world where WW2 still breaks out, but due to Polish efforts the Russians have no chance of advancing deeper, causing the war to quickly end. In the other timeline, we will explore a world where the Second World War doesn't start, but Russia is forced into peace. Let's first start with the latter. In our timeline, the Russians had built up their army and shifted to a war economy as they were expecting a Dutch retaliation for their future Polish actions. This move was historically very unpopular, and the workers protested, as their conditions were harsh. Yet after the Russian victory in the Second World War, the protests became a propaganda tool for the Russian government. They told their people that they should have more trust in their government as they have proven to know best. In this timeline, the Poles are informed of the Russian protests and their intelligence links the protests to an army buildup, likely meant to be used against Poland. The Poles defend their border better, and when the Russians strike, they find a much more prepared Poland. The Russians still try to crawl down the Polish coast, yet just like what happened historically, the Riga offensive sees the Russian army trapped. With the Dutch sending a very clear message to not mess with their territorial waters, the Russians are too afraid to use their newly acquired navy to save their troops, and the Poles begin taking ground from the Courland Pocket. In the south, the Galicia offensive is cut off from the main front, destroying the Russian plan to force the Polish troops into Romania. The old empire is in disbelief. They see how incompetent the Russians are and decide to stop supporting Russia. Likewise, the Norwegians leave the Square Pact. The Russians are now truly alone, and the effects are being felt. The Ukrainians and Nenets revolt against Russia. And the Russians have to focus more of their army on these new fronts. The Poles eventually manage to push the Russians out of their country and begin invading into Russia proper. With the Poles approaching the Russian capital, the people revolt. They take inspiration from the original Farmers' Rebellion in the then Farmers' Union and declare the Workers' Republic of Russia. The Polish army quickly moves in to occupy Estonia, liberating them. In the peace deal, Poland gains some land from Russia whilst Ukraine, Nenetsia, Novgorod and Estonia are liberated and put under Polish protection. The workers' government takes over the rest of Russia. With Russia defeated, there is no hope for the old empire to win a WW2, so they might try to take Caspia and Pasyndia. However, I doubt they would be successful in these invasions. And I expect a white peace to come from this. Eventually, the old empire will have to face the reality that they will not win by war. Eventually, I do expect the Europeans to decolonize at least Africa, and maybe keep Oceania and America. Over time, a big war will inevitably happen, but it is impossible to predict the circumstances of such a conflict. Going back in time, we see the Russians still push the soldiers south, and the Greeks still try to rescue the Polish troops starting the Second World War. But with the Russians already on the losing side, the Dutch join the war immediately, and the Dutch and Triangle power nations take the initiative and invade the old empire without focusing on Russia or Norway. I expect the old empire to quickly lose in such a scenario, and with Caspia and Pasyndia now in the war, the old empire is quick to lose. The Russians then are overrun by the Allied forces, and Norway sues for peace. In this alternate WW2, the old empire is split up again and get a transitional government. The Russians are fully split up and are occupied by the Triangle powers whilst ceding land to Poland. At this point, we slowly move back to the previous scenario, and the Europeans slowly decolonize Africa. It might be possible that only the Dutch decolonize whilst the core of the Triangle Pact stay colonial. This may result in a Cold War between the Dutch and African Union on one side and the Triangle Pact on the other, which is a scenario I might cover one day. Yet another short scenario, I know. I am terribly sorry for this. I had to get this scenario out quickly as I am working on something big. Stay tuned for a big announcement soon.